Your services are no longer required. Pack your personal items and IT will disable your credentials within the hour. Brittany Pierce delivered the words like she was ordering a latte, not even glancing up from her rose gold MacBook where she was still configuring her corporate email signature. The new Vice President of Digital Transformation. Day 1, Target 1, me. Her nails were the color of dried blood, tapping against the aluminum casing with the rhythm of someone who had never debugged a single line of code in her life. She had the kind of confidence that came from marrying well and failing upward, her engagement ring catching the fluorescent light like a warning beacon. The diamond was ostentatious, probably 3 carats, the kind of ring that announces its presence before its owner speaks. Behind her stood Marcus from Human Resources, clutching his tablet like a life raft, his eyes darting between us as if watching someone juggle live grenades over a pit of sleeping alligators. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand explanations. After 27 years of building systems that kept this company breathing, you learn that rage is just wasted bandwidth. Panic is poor architecture. I simply stood, smoothed my blazer, the same gray blazer I'd worn to my first board meeting in 1998, and placed my employee badge on the glass conference table with the precision of someone setting the final piece on a chessboard. She smiled, that thin, rehearsed smile of someone who thinks they've won before the game has even started. Her teeth were too white, her lipstick too perfect, her entire presentation calibrated for a LinkedIn headshot rather than actual leadership. I let it wash over me like corrupted data. Harmless, temporary, a minor system error that would soon be corrected. You'll want to inform your father-in-law that the emergency board session at 4 this afternoon will require his full attention, I said, keeping my voice as flat as a terminal prompt. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. Explanations are for people who don't already hold all the cards. Then I walked out, past Marcus, who couldn't meet my eyes, past the rows of developers who had stopped typing mid-keystroke, past the server room where the hum of machines I had personally configured still echoed through the walls like a heartbeat, past the glass case in the lobby displaying the original prototype I had soldered together in my garage 27 years ago, back when this company was nothing but a dream and a maxed-out credit card and 3 engineers who believed they could change how the world protected its data. She thought she was eliminating dead weight. What she didn't understand was that she had just unplugged the only person who knew where all the power cables connected. But let me rewind, because this story doesn't start with Brittany Pierce and her designer termination speech. It starts with me, Victoria Chen, and a storage closet that smelled like burnt coffee and possibility. I'm the chief architecture officer. At least that's what the org chart says when anyone bothers to look at the org chart, which they rarely do because the org chart is a fiction we tell investors and new hires. In reality, I'm the woman who wrote the original code base that everything in this company runs on. Every authentication protocol, every encryption key, every single line of proprietary code that makes our cloud security platform the industry standard. I built it from scratch in '96 when people still thought the internet was a fad, when firewalls were something you installed in buildings to stop actual fires, and when cybersecurity meant putting a lock on the server room door. For 27 years, I've been the ghost in the machine, the name that doesn't appear on keynote slides or magazine covers or the flashy About Us page on our website. That was always fine with me. I never wanted the spotlight. I never wanted the corner office with the city view, or the reserved parking spot, or the speaking engagements at tech conferences. I wanted the architecture. I wanted to build something that would outlast quarterly earnings reports and executive ego trips. My office is in the basement, not because I was banished there, not because I lost some corporate turf war, but because that's where the original server farm lives. The machines that still run our legacy systems, the ones that power the backbone of everything we do. The walls are lined with cables that I personally ran back when running cables was something senior engineers still did with their own hands. Routers that I configured by hand before configuration became a job title. Backup drives that contain 27 years of institutional memory that nobody else knows how to access. The air down here tastes like recycled oxygen and silicon dreams. There's a specific smell to a working server room, a combination of ozone and warm plastic, and the indefinable scent of electricity doing its job. The constant whir of cooling fans provides a white noise that drowns out the corporate theater happening on the floors above. Up there, they're arguing about quarterly projections and market positioning and strategic synergies. Down here, I'm keeping the lights on. I know every blinking light on every server rack. I know which cable runs to which floor. I know the password to systems that 3 generations of IT directors have forgotten even exist. I know where the redundancies are buried, which backup systems kick in when the primary fails, where the legacy code interfaces with the modern architecture in ways that would make a computer science professor weep with confusion. While the executives upstairs play musical chairs with titles and corner offices, I sit down here with the actual infrastructure, the heartbeat of the operation, the foundation that everything else is built on. They think they run the company. I know what actually runs the company. Here's what doesn't appear in any company handbook. 27 years ago, when this place was 3 engineers and a borrowed conference room and a coffee machine that only worked if you kicked it twice, I didn't just write the code. I wrote the intellectual property assignment agreement. And I was smart about it. I retained ownership of the core encryption architecture under a perpetual licensing arrangement. The company licenses my technology. They don't own it. They never have. Nobody questioned it back then because nobody thought it would matter. We were just trying to survive. We were just trying to make payroll and keep the servers running and convince one more client that our little startup could protect their data better than the established players. Gerald signed it without reading past the first page. The other 2 founders signed it because they trusted me. The lawyers signed off because the language was clean and the risk seemed theoretical. Everyone assumed that success would smooth over any rough edges in the paperwork. They were wrong about that too. But it matters now because that licensing agreement includes a clause that I wrote very carefully at 3 in the morning after we'd lost our first major client to a competitor who had more polish and less substance. I wrote it because I knew that someday someone would try to push me out, someone who didn't understand what I'd built, someone who saw my lack of visibility as weakness instead of strategy. Article 14b. Automatic termination of technology rights upon involuntary separation of the original architect without majority board approval. Translation for non-lawyers: fire me without proper procedure and you lose access to the foundation your entire product is built on. Every customer contract, every security certification, every government compliance approval, every partnership agreement with every major tech company that relies on our platform. All of it depends on technology that legally belongs to me. The board knows. They review the licensing agreement every year during the annual audit. The investors know. It's disclosed in every funding document. The founder knows. He signed the original agreement himself back when he still understood what we were building and why it mattered. But Brittany Pierce, with her freshly minted MBA and her father-in-law's last name and her 6 weeks of employment, didn't know, because nobody thought to tell the new executive that the quiet woman in the basement was the load-bearing wall of the entire operation. Nobody thought it was important. Nobody thought she would be stupid enough to fire the one person who couldn't be fired. They were wrong. Now, Brittany. Let me tell you about Brittany Pierce. She wasn't hired, she was installed, dropped into the executive suite like a software patch nobody requested, an update that crashed more systems than it fixed. Her blonde highlights cost more than my first month's salary back in '96, designer heels that clicked against the floor like a countdown timer, a degree from a business school that I'm fairly certain now offers courses in synergy and disruption without any actual technical content. Her first all-hands meeting, she stood at the front of the conference room with a clicker in her hand and a 100-slide deck that said absolutely nothing. She talked for 90 minutes about innovation mindsets and disruption readiness and something called velocity thinking that I'm still not convinced is a real concept. At one point, she showed a slide with our revenue projections next to a photo of a rocket ship. The rocket ship had nothing to do with anything. It was just there because someone told her that executives like pictures of rocket ships. The engineers in the back row were checking their phones. The product managers were taking notes they would never read. I sat in the corner and counted how many times she said the word synergy. 14. 14 times in 90 minutes. She set up her office on the executive floor in the space that used to belong to our chief operating officer before he retired. She brought in new furniture, modern, uncomfortable, designed to photograph well for social media rather than actually support long working hours. She had the walls painted something called contemplative sage. She installed a meditation corner. She got a standing desk that she never actually stood at. Her first week, she fired the head of quality assurance, Dennis Kowalski, a 17-year veteran who caught 3 critical vulnerabilities in our authentication system last year alone. Vulnerabilities that would have cost us our SOC 2 certification if they'd gone unpatched. Vulnerabilities that could have exposed our clients to breaches that would end careers and possibly lives. Her reasoning, delivered in an all-hands email that made every technical person in the building wince: he wasn't agile enough, didn't embrace the pivot, was too focused on legacy thinking. She wrote that last phrase in italics like it was something clever. Dennis cleaned out his desk and said nothing. He was too professional for a scene, too experienced to burn bridges in an industry where everyone knows everyone. That's what happens when you've been in this business long enough. You learn that some battles aren't worth the severance negotiation. Week 2, she restructured the engineering department based on a framework she'd read about in a Harvard Business Review article, something called pods of innovation. Teams that had worked together for a decade were scattered like data across corrupted sectors. Senior developers suddenly reported to project managers who'd been hired 6 months ago. Our biggest enterprise client sent a formal letter expressing concerns about service quality degradation, but Brittany was too busy scheduling her LinkedIn photo shoot to notice the warning lights, too busy posting about her journey of leadership transformation to see the foundation cracking beneath her designer heels. She had this habit of calling everyone young talent, regardless of age or experience. "You're all young talent to me," she'd say with that practiced grin, which I suspect was her way of establishing dominance without having to remember names. A 53-year-old database architect with more certifications than she had brain cells was young talent. A security specialist who'd been defending systems since before she graduated high school was young talent. She once referred to our entire legacy system as technical debt that needed to be burned down, seemingly unaware that this technical debt was the only thing keeping the company solvent. But I was patient. I've debugged code that took 6 months to trace. I've rebuilt systems after catastrophic failures at 3 in the morning with no documentation and no backup. I can wait. I can watch. I can let someone dig their own grave while keeping my hands clean and my documentation ready. Then she set her sights on me, the quiet woman in the basement, the name nobody remembered at company parties, the ghost in the machine who had been there since before there was a machine to haunt. Before I tell you how I systematically disassembled Brittany Pierce's entire career trajectory, do me a solid. Hit that subscribe button and give this a like. I'm not desperate. I've been pushed out of nicer buildings than this one, and I've walked back into every single one of them. But these stories help expose what really happens in the chrome and glass towers where people think they're untouchable. You'd be surprised how often the person getting terminated is the one who controls the kill switch. Now, back to our regularly scheduled system failure. It was a Thursday when she made her move, October 19th. I remember the date because it was the anniversary of our first successful external security audit, back when we were a scrappy startup that everyone expected to fail within the year. I had just finished my morning diagnostics, the daily ritual of checking server logs and reviewing system performance that I'd been doing since before anyone thought to call it DevOps. Marcus from HR appeared at my basement office door, looking like a man who had been ordered to defuse a bomb while blindfolded and given instructions in a language he didn't speak. His face was pale. His tablet was shaking slightly in his hands. He was a decent person, Marcus. I'd helped him recover files from a crashed laptop once. He brought me coffee sometimes. He knew he was being used as a weapon, and he hated it. "Victoria," he said, his voice cracking on the first syllable. "There's been a meeting scheduled. Conference room A, 30 minutes. I saved my work, closed my laptop, took a breath. I knew what it was. The pattern was obvious to anyone who'd been paying attention. Brittany had been circling me for weeks, making comments in meetings about modernization and fresh perspectives, and the importance of making room for new ideas. She'd questioned my budget twice in executive sessions I wasn't invited to. She'd started copying me on emails about early retirement incentives, the corporate equivalent of leaving brochures for nursing homes on your grandmother's coffee table. Corporate euphemisms, all of them, codes that everyone understood but nobody spoke plainly. You're old, you're expensive, you're not part of my vision, I want you gone. Conference room A was on the executive floor. All glass walls and designer furniture that looked uncomfortable on purpose. The kind of room designed to intimidate, to remind you of your place in the hierarchy. The kind of room where careers ended. I took the elevator up, 17 floors, each floor passing like a countdown. When the doors opened, the entire executive wing had gone quiet. People were pretending to work at their computers, but nobody was actually typing. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know what. The walk from the elevator to conference room A is exactly 47 steps. I know because I counted them. 47 steps past the motivational posters that Brittany had installed. 47 steps past the glass offices where executives pretended not to watch me pass. When I walked in, Brittany was already seated at the head of the table. Gerald's table. Gerald's chair. She'd claimed it without permission, and apparently nobody had stopped her. She was flanked by the general counsel, a careful man named Robert that I'd worked with for 15 years, and the chief financial officer, Sarah, who had been one of my first hires when we'd grown big enough to need someone who understood money. Both of them looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. There was a water pitcher on the table that nobody had touched, a notepad with the company logo that nobody had written on. The silence was thick enough to taste. Smart people, both of them. They knew what I was worth. They knew what was about to happen, and they knew there was nothing they could do except watch. "Victoria," Brittany said, not standing, not offering a handshake, not acknowledging the 27 years I'd given to a company that existed because of me. "We've been evaluating our organizational structure, and we've determined that your role no longer aligns with our strategic direction." She slid a folder across the table, like she was dealing cards in a casino where she thought she owned all the chips. "This is your separation agreement. Very generous considering the circumstances." The folder was thick, professional. Someone had spent time on it. It's the kind of folder that says we're doing this by the book while doing something profoundly stupid. I didn't open it. I didn't touch it. I just watched her, the way you watch a process run that you already know is going to crash. "The circumstances," I repeated, keeping my voice flat, curious, non-threatening. "We're moving toward a cloud-native architecture," she explained, clearly reciting from a script someone else had written. "Your legacy expertise is no longer aligned with our technological trajectory." Legacy expertise. The phrase hung in the air like a bad smell, like she was describing obsolete equipment instead of the person who'd built the technological trajectory she was now claiming to redirect. Behind her, Robert, the general counsel, winced. He knew. Sarah, the CFO, was studying the grain of the conference table like it contained the secrets of the universe. She knew too. "I see," I said. "And does the board know about this decision?" Brittany's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in the facade. "I don't need board approval to make staffing decisions within my purview," she said, and there was an edge creeping into her voice now, the edge of someone who doesn't like being questioned. "Your purview," I repeated, and then I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly smile, the smile of someone who has been waiting 27 years for exactly this moment. I stood up slowly, buttoning my blazer with the deliberate calm of someone entering the final phase of a very long operation. "Then I suggest you call an emergency board session for this afternoon, 4 o'clock, and I suggest every board member attend, either in person or by video, because in approximately 4 hours, you're going to discover exactly what your purview actually includes." Brittany started to respond, but I was already moving toward the door. "Wait," she said, "you can't just leave. We need you to sign the agreement." I stopped, turned, looked at her one final time. "I'm not signing anything. I'm walking out of this building with my dignity and my documentation, and you should hope, for your sake and your father-in-law's sake, that the board meeting this afternoon goes very well, because if it doesn't, you won't just be explaining a personnel decision. You'll be explaining how you single-handedly destroyed a company that took 27 years to build." I collected my belongings, not many. A photo of my daughter's graduation, the frame slightly worn from years of sitting on my desk, the original napkin sketch of our authentication architecture, framed and faded, a coffee mug from a security conference in '99, chipped on the handle but still my favorite, 27 years of work, and it all fit in one cardboard box. That's the thing about building infrastructure. The value isn't in what you can carry, it's in what stays behind. As I walked out, Brittany called after me. "You're making a mistake, Victoria. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't turn around. Some warnings are better delivered by silence. Some exits are more powerful when you don't look back. 4 hours. That's how long Brittany had between firing me and discovering that her father-in-law's company had just been put on life support with no password to the defibrillator. During those 4 hours, I imagined she felt triumphant. Maybe she updated her LinkedIn profile. Vice President of Digital Transformation, leading strategic initiatives and organizational optimization. Maybe she drafted a memo about lean leadership and difficult decisions. Perhaps she even started moving into my old corner office, measuring for new curtains and planning where to put her meditation corner. Perhaps she sent a message to her husband, Gerald's son, telling her the deed was done. Perhaps she celebrated with a latte from the executive floor's espresso machine. Meanwhile, I was in my car, parked 3 blocks away, making phone calls. I had pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop I'd been going to for 15 years. The barista knew my order by heart. She started making my usual before I even reached the counter. Some things in this world are still reliable. I sat at a corner table with my laptop open and my phone in my hand, and I began the process I had been preparing for since 1998. My first call was to Patricia Lawson, lead board director, former tech executive herself, a woman who had put $40 million into this company over 3 funding rounds because she believed in what we built. She answered on the second ring. "Victoria," she said, "I heard something happened this morning." "Something did," I confirmed. "I've been terminated, effective immediately, by the new Vice President of Digital Transformation." Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that means someone is calculating very quickly. I could almost hear her reaching for her other phone to call her lawyers. "Was there a board vote?" Patricia asked carefully. "There was not." "I see." Patricia's voice had gone cold, professional but cold. "Did she invoke any specific authority for this termination?" "She informed me that she didn't need board approval to make staffing decisions within her purview."
More silence. I could almost hear Patricia's thoughts crystallizing into action. "I'll have my attorneys contact yours within the hour," she said finally, "and I assume you'll be filing the appropriate notices. The Article 14B notice is being prepared as we speak." Patricia exhaled, a long, controlled breath. "This is going to be quite an afternoon." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." My second call was to my attorney. We'd been preparing for this possibility for years, not specifically for Brittany, but for anyone who might try to push me out without understanding the consequences. The documentation was ready. The filings were prepared. All we needed was the trigger. Now we had the trigger. By 2 o'clock, the Article 14B notice had been formally filed. The notification that Nexus Cloud Security's perpetual license to my encryption architecture was now in 30-day termination review pending board remediation. That document went to every board member, every major investor, every regulatory body that had certified our platform for government and healthcare and financial services work, every insurance carrier who provided our liability coverage, every enterprise client whose contract included technology continuity clauses. The legal language was precise, cold, devastating. It explained, in terms that left no room for interpretation, that the company's core technology was under ownership dispute, that service continuity could not be guaranteed, that any new contracts signed during the review period would be subject to potential invalidation. Within 90 minutes of that filing, my phone started vibrating with a frequency that made it nearly impossible to hold. Text messages from board members I hadn't spoken to in years, emails from investors demanding explanations, a voicemail from our largest enterprise client's legal department asking very pointed questions about technology ownership and service continuity. The healthcare conglomerate that represented 18% of our revenue called twice. Their general counsel left a message that was polite but unmistakably threatening. "If there's any question about the integrity of the technology infrastructure we rely on, we'll need to begin evaluating alternative providers immediately." I received 17 emails from the same venture capital firm in the span of 1 hour, each one more urgent than the last. The final one was from the managing partner himself, a man I'd met exactly once at a funding celebration, demanding a phone call within the hour. 3 venture capital partners called within an hour of each other, all of them asking the same question in different ways. Is this real? Is the company actually at risk? Should we be preparing for a total loss scenario? Our insurance carrier requested an emergency review of our liability coverage. Our auditors sent a formal inquiry about the status of our technology certifications. A reporter from a tech publication somehow got wind of the filing and started making calls. The dominoes were falling, and I hadn't pushed a single one. I had simply removed the support that had been holding them up. By hour 3, Gerald Pierce himself called. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor and the rope was in someone else's hands. "Victoria," he said, "what have you done?" "Nothing yet," I replied. "I simply informed the appropriate parties that my technology rights are entering termination review, as specified in our original licensing agreement, Article 14B, Clause 7, Subsection 3, if you want to look it up." Silence on his end, the kind of silence that precedes catastrophic system failure. "That agreement was signed 27 years ago," he said finally. The words came out slowly, carefully, like he was stepping around broken glass. "Nobody remembers those terms. I remember them. I wrote them. And Gerald," I said, letting his name land like a stone in still water, "so did your lawyers. So did the auditors who reviewed them before every funding round. So did the compliance team that certified them for every government contract we've ever won." More silence. I let it stretch. "This is about Brittany," he said, not a question, a realization. "This is about protocol. This is about governance. This is about the fact that your daughter-in-law terminated a founding executive without board authorization. That triggers Article 14B. I didn't create these consequences, Gerald. I just prepared for them." "What do you want?" he asked, and I could hear the calculation behind the question. Gerald had always been a negotiator, always looking for the angle.
I want the board to meet at 4 o'clock today, full attendance, video participation for anyone who can't be there in person, and I want everyone who has equity in this company to understand exactly what they're invested in. That's all. Victoria, he started. 4 o'clock, Gerald. I suggest you make some phone calls. I hung up, turned off my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and waited. The board session convened at 4:15. The extra 15 minutes was because 3 members were calling in from other time zones, frantically rearranging schedules to deal with what everyone was now calling the Chen situation. Private jets were redirected. Vacation plans were canceled. One board member literally left his daughter's graduation ceremony early to join the call. Another was patched in from a hospital waiting room where his wife was in labor. The stakes were that high. The panic was that real. The conference room had been transformed into a war room. Legal documents were spread across every surface. Laptops displayed spreadsheets showing the potential financial impact. Someone had printed out the full text of Article 14B and highlighted it in 3 different colors. I wasn't invited, not officially, but I didn't need to be. The documents spoke for themselves. The original technology licensing agreement, signed by all founding members with Article 14B highlighted in yellow, the IP ownership records showing that the core encryption architecture was registered to Victoria Chen, licensed to Nexus Cloud Security LLC under conditional perpetual terms. The conditions were spelled out in language any first-year law student could understand. Any involuntary separation of the technology owner requires supermajority board approval, 60%. Absent that approval, the license enters automatic termination review, 30 days to remediate or face complete technology forfeiture. The math was simple. Without my technology, Nexus Cloud Security couldn't operate. Every customer contract included technology continuity clauses. Every certification depended on specific encryption protocols that I owned. Every partnership agreement referenced proprietary architecture that legally belonged to me. Brittany had fired me without board approval, without even a board notification, without understanding what she was actually doing. In trying to eliminate what she saw as dead weight, she had accidentally triggered the corporate equivalent of a nuclear launch sequence. I later heard about that board meeting from 3 different sources, all telling the same story with varying degrees of horror. Gerald tried to control the narrative. He called it a misunderstanding, a procedural oversight, a communication failure that could be easily remediated. He used words like unfortunate and regrettable and certainly fixable. He talked about family, about loyalty, about how Brittany was just trying to make her mark, just trying to prove herself, just trying to bring fresh perspective to an organization that had perhaps grown too comfortable with its success. But the investors weren't having it. Harrison, the venture capitalist who had led our Series C funding, interrupted Gerald mid-sentence. With respect, Gerald, I didn't $43 million in fresh perspective. I invested in technology that apparently belongs to someone you just fired. The room went silent. Gerald's face went pale. Patricia Lawson reportedly stood up and delivered a speech that several attendees compared to watching someone get publicly executed with words. Let me understand this correctly, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze server coolant. Your daughter-in-law, who has been employed here for 6 weeks and holds 0 equity, terminated the person who owns the fundamental technology underlying our entire product line, without board approval, without board notification, without apparently asking a single person whether this might be a bad idea. And now we have 30 days to either remediate this situation or lose everything we've built over 27 years. Is that an accurate summary? Gerald started to respond, but Patricia wasn't finished. Because if that's accurate, then what we're really discussing isn't a personnel issue. It's a fiduciary catastrophe engineered by someone you appointed to a position of authority despite having no relevant qualifications beyond sharing a Thanksgiving table with you. Am I wrong, Gerald? Is there something I'm missing here? Someone on the video call, one of our early angel investors, unmuted himself just long enough to say, "This is exactly why I told you to read the IP clauses before the Series A." Then he muted himself again. He wasn't wrong, she wasn't wrong, and everyone in that room knew it. The silence that followed Patricia's speech lasted nearly 2 full minutes, an eternity in a boardroom, an eternity when $40 million and 1,200 jobs and 27 years of work hang in the balance. The vote came quickly, faster than anyone expected. Brittany Pierce's termination order was immediately rescinded, which meant nothing, practically speaking, because her authority had already been revoked by the Article 14B filing. You can't unfire someone when your ability to fire anyone has been legally suspended. Then came the harder conversation. What to do about Brittany? What to do about Gerald? What to do about the fundamental governance failure that had allowed this to happen? happen. Patricia Lawson, again. We need Victoria in this room now. I was waiting in the lobby. I had been there for 45 minutes, reading through emails on my laptop and watching the security desk handle the usual afternoon traffic. When the board secretary came to get me, I didn't gloat. I didn't rush. I simply closed my laptop, picked up my bag, and walked to the elevator like I was headed to any other meeting on any other day. The boardroom was quiet when I entered, the kind of quiet that happens after a controlled detonation. The air smelled like cold coffee and fear. Someone had ordered food that nobody had eaten. Sandwiches sat untouched on a side table, their plastic wraps still intact. Gerald sat at the head of the table, but he looked diminished somehow, smaller than I'd ever seen him. His usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. His tie was loosened. His jacket was off. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor and the rope was in someone else's hands. The other board members were arranged along both sides, laptops open, coffee cups empty, faces carved from exhaustion and revelation. Some of them couldn't meet my eyes. Others stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time. And there was Brittany, sitting at the far end of the table, as far from her father-in-law as the room would allow. Her perfect posture had crumbled. Her designer blazer was wrinkled. Her makeup was smudged. The confidence that radiated from her that morning was gone, replaced by something hollow and confused, like a program that had encountered an error it couldn't process, like someone who was so certain of their own importance that they never considered the possibility of being wrong. "Victoria," Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair, "please sit." I took the chair they'd left for me, directly across from Gerald, close enough to see the calculations still working behind his eyes. Even now, "The board has voted," Patricia continued. "Your termination has been rescinded. Your licensing agreement remains in full effect. We owe you an apology for the procedural failure that occurred, and we are prepared to discuss appropriate remediation." I let the silence stretch. In negotiations, the person who speaks first usually loses, and I had been waiting 27 years to let this silence do its work. Finally, I spoke. "I don't want an apology. Apologies are cheap. Apologies don't rebuild trust or restore confidence or